I told you that being a saint has, like, absolutely nothing to do with being a good person?
I mean, that sounds totally backwards to most people.
Right. But if we look closely at the blueprint we are unpacking today, um, almost every assumption that modern culture makes about spiritual identity is completely upside down.
It really is.
So, welcome to today's deep dive. I'm your host, and I'm here with our resident expert. And today, our mission is to decode this massive, highly structured, and incredibly dense theological document.
Yeah, it's a heavy read for sure.
Oh, totally. And it basically breaks down human spiritual transformation into four highly distinct identities. So we're looking at disciples, believers, saints, and Christians.
And, to the modern ear, those four words, they just sound like absolute synonyms.
Oh, yeah. Like they mean the exact same thing to most people.
Right. I mean, if you polled 100 people on the street, they would likely use disciple, believer, saint, and Christian completely interchangeably.
Just to describe, someone who goes to church and tries to be a good moral person.
Exactly.
Mhm.
But the source material we have in front of us today, it treats them as a very rigorous progression.
Right.
It's a highly specific journey, mapping how a person supposedly moves from being, well, what the text calls a natural man, to becoming a God man.
Which is such a fascinating term. And honestly, whether you are deeply religious or entirely secular or just, fascinated by how belief systems construct human identity, this text offers a surprisingly intricate psychological framework.
That's extremely detailed.
Because usually when we talk about identity, we expect precision and permanence, like you are an accountant or you are a parent or you're a cynic.
The label is basically binary.
Yeah, exactly. You get it, you wear it, and it just sits there like a name tag. But this text sort of shatters that labeling machine. It presents an identity landscape that is dynamic and demanding and just constantly evolving.
And I should add, the author of this outline provides very heavy scriptural cross-references. I mean, spanning all the way from Genesis to Revelation,
Yeah.
just to back up this evolutionary process.
It's like an architectural approach to theology.
That's a great way to put it. And to understand the architecture, to understand this ultimate goal of the God-man, we really have to locate the starting line of the transformation process.
Which the text defines as being a disciple.
Yes, the disciple is the starting point.
Now, I have to admit, my initial thought when reading the word disciple was entirely rooted in pop culture.
Like what?
Well, I pictured a student sitting at a desk, or like the classic Mr. Miyagi and Daniel San dynamic from The Karate Kid, wax on, wax off.
Right.
The master imparts a philosophy, the student mimics the physical movements, and eventually the student acquires a new skill. It's just a transfer of information and technique.
Sure, that's the standard pedagogical model, but it falls completely short of what this text is arguing.
Oh, entirely.
Even the Mr. Miyagi metaphor just does not go far enough. I mean, Miyagi transfers a skill, but this text is talking about transferring DNA.
Wow. DNA.
Yeah.
Oh.
It explicitly defines a disciple as someone aiming to become an organic reproduction and duplication of Christ.
That phrase, organic reproduction, it completely shifts the paradigm from education to biology.
Exactly.
It's intense, almost visceral language.
Yeah.
It suggests you aren't just like adopting a teacher's worldview. You are attempting to become a biological clone of their nature.
Because the text argues that the goal is to experience Christ in his experiences, so that the disciple becomes a literal duplication.
And the purpose of this duplication?
It's for a corporate expression.
Yeah.
This isn't about learning historical facts or, ethical aphorisms. It's about a fundamental change in your core nature.
Which brings up the obvious question, right? How on earth does that massive biological and psychological change supposedly happen?
Well, the text points to a very specific mechanism.
Right. It talks about being renewed in the spirit of your mind, referencing Ephesians 4. Those verses talk about putting off the old man, which the text aligns with your former manner of life, and being renewed in the spirit of your mind to put on the new man.
So let's analyze the psychology of that for a moment. To be renewed in your mind, according to this framework, means getting rid of all the old concepts concerning the things of human life.
Like everything you previously thought you knew.
Basically, yeah. You have an existing psychological scaffolding, right? Built by your culture, your upbringing, your natural inclinations. The text insists that this scaffolding must be completely dismantled.
It cites Romans 12 as well, which commands the reader to not be fashioned according to this age, but to be transformed.
Hmm.
So there is this literal tearing down of the old architecture and the building of a new one.
Yes.
But the way the text describes acquiring the materials for this new scaffolding, that's what really caught my attention. The language moves from the biological to the downright digestive.
No, you're referring to the eating metaphor.
Yes.
The digestion concept. I mean, the text uses this jarring imagery about eating Christ.
It quotes John 6, where it says, "He who eats me, he also shall live because of me."
Exactly. And then it pulls in Jeremiah 15, which says, your words were found and I ate them. So when you look at those verses side by side, the author is establishing a literal equivalence between the person of Christ and the written word.
And framing both of them as consumable nutrients. I actually found an analogy to help clarify what the text is getting at here.
Now let's hear it.
Okay, think about literal human digestion. When you eat a piece of bread, your body doesn't just store it in a microscopic backpack for later reference.
So, breaks it down.
Right. Your stomach acids break it down, your intestines absorb the nutrients, and your body uses those molecules to build new human cells.
So you literally become what you consume on a cellular level.
Exactly. And that maps perfectly onto the mechanism the author is pointing to. The text argues that prayerful reading of the scriptures is a form of spiritual digestion.
Meaning, you aren't memorizing verses just to win a debate.
No, or to pass a theology exam. You are breaking down the text, absorbing its essence, and allowing it to build a new spiritual nature inside of you.
It is reconstituting you.
Yeah. And that is a heavy word, reconstitution. It implies you were made of one substance, melted down and reformed with a completely different substance.
And the text explicitly uses that concept, bringing in Deuteronomy 17. In that passage, the king of Israel is commanded to write out a copy of the law in a book and read it all the days of his life.
Just constantly reading it.
Right. But the text's commentary on this goes beyond legal compliance. It argues the purpose is so that the king is internally governed, ruled, and controlled by the word he has consumed.
So the external law becomes an internal disposition through this constant act of digesting. But if I'm being honest, this sounds absolutely exhausting.
How so?
Well, you have this intense process of tearing down your old mind, constantly eating the word, digesting it, building new cells, fighting off the old concepts of the age. It just sounds like an endless, grinding spiritual workout.
I think the author actually anticipates that exact reaction. Because immediately after discussing this intense reconstitution, the text introduces a profound paradox to balance it out.
The tension between rest and the yoke from Matthew 11. Yes. Come to me, all who toil and are burdened, and I will give you rest. That part sounds great, but the very next sentence is, take my yoke upon you.
We really need to define what a yoke actually is in an agricultural context.
It's a heavy wooden beam.
Exactly. Custom carved to fit the necks of oxen, used to harness them together to pull massive weight. It is the historical symbol of subjugation, hard labor, and restriction.
So how does taking on a heavy wooden yoke equal finding rest for your souls? If I'm burdened and toiling, the last thing I want someone to do is drop a wooden beam on my neck.
It seems like a massive contradiction.
It really does.
Until you look at how the text frames the source of the energy. The verse continues, take my yoke, for I am meek and lowly in heart.
Okay, so where does the rest come from?
The text explains that the rest comes from the cessation of the natural struggle. It argues that the Lord Jesus lived a human life on earth not by his own natural strength, but by tapping into another source.
The Father. Right.
So, when a disciple takes the yoke, they're being harnessed to that same indwelling source. Precisely. The yoke isn't heavy because you are no longer pulling the plow with your own natural energy.
Because modern society views rest as escapism. Like a hammock on a beach, disconnecting from all responsibility.
But the text views rest as perfectly aligned labor without internal friction. You are still pulling the plow, you're still doing the work of being reconstituted, but the energy is supplied by the word you have eaten.
The rest is not the absence of work, it's the absence of having to manufacture your own fuel. And this actually leads to my favorite phrase in the entire document.
Oh, I think I know which one you mean.
If you do all of this, if you digest the word, put on the new mind, and labor from this internal source of rest, the text says you become Jesusly human.
Jesusly human. That is quite a striking coinage.
It's brilliant because it completely subverts our expectations. When people picture a deeply religious disciple who is separated from the world, they usually picture someone austere.
Right. Maybe a bit rigid or humorless.
Or overly mystical, like someone floating 3 inches off the ground who cannot relate to normal people at all.
But the text defines being Jesusly human in a radically grounded way. It states that having the presence of what it calls the triune God makes disciples into persons who are sweet, charming, and attractive to those whom they contact without any deception or hypocrisy.
Let's quickly define triune God as the text uses it, just for those unfamiliar with the jargon. It refers to the Christian concept of the Trinity Father, Son, and Spirit.
But this specific text treats that Trinity not just as an objective theology to believe in, but as an active three-in-one divine mechanism operating inside the believer.
And the result of that divine mechanism operating inside you isn't that you become weird and disconnected, it's that you become sweet, charming, and attractive.
Without deception.
Right. I love that this highly complex theological architecture ultimately aims to produce someone who's just a joy to be around.
It cites Philippians 4, which talks about letting your forbearance, your reasonableness, your gentleness be known to all men.
And Nehemiah 8, which says, "The joy of Jehovah is your strength." The proof that your spiritual digestion is working isn't that you speak in riddles, it's that you are joyfully, charmingly human.
And crucially, the text notes that this specific flavor of humanity is learned through observation, not just reading.
Yeah, this cannot be a purely solo academic exercise in a library.
There's a quote at the end of this section regarding a figure named Brother Watchman Nee. The quote says, "I was in the recovery observing how Brother Watchman Nee acted for 18 years. All that I observed in him became things discipling me."
18 years of just watching how a mentor acts.
It proves the text's central thesis about what a disciple actually is. You cannot just read a book about how to be sweet, charming, and attractive in a divine sense. You have to observe a model of it, reacting to stress, handling conflict, and interacting with people.
It implies an intense, long-term apprenticeship of life, not just a weekly lecture.
So if this first identity, the disciple, is all about the active, daily grind of learning, observing, and digesting to change your nature,
Right.
what happens when that digestion actually takes root?
Right. Does your fundamental status change?
It does, and that brings us to the second distinct identity in this framework, the believer.
Again, believer is a word we throw around so casually today. Usually it just means you agree with a set of facts. You believe the earth is round, or you believe your favorite sports team will win the championship. How does this text redefine it?
The text defines a believer as someone who has undergone a total transfer of identity and lineage. The phrase used is that they have been transferred from Adam into Christ.
So it's treating Adam and Christ not just as historical individuals, but as two different realms or categories of humanity.
Exactly. It references 1 Corinthians 15, "For just as in Adam all die, so also in Christ all will be made alive." And 2 Corinthians 5, "If anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation."
It's not arguing for self-improvement.
No, an improved version of the old creation is still the old creation. It is arguing for a regenerative process.
The text actually says that believers are generated twice. The first time, they are generated by their human parents to be the natural man, but the second time, they are regenerated to be born anew with the divine eternal life.
It points to John 3, where Jesus tells Nicodemus, "That which is born of the flesh is flesh, and that which is born of the Spirit is spirit. You must be born anew."
This concept of a second birth leads directly into one of the most fascinating legal and spiritual metaphors in the entire document.
The second birth certificate.
Yes. The text zeroes in on Romans 8, which reads, "The Spirit himself witnesses with our spirit that we are children of God." The author literally calls this the second birth certificate of our spiritual birth.
It is what the text describes as a divine and mystical concept, the reality of a double spirit.
Let's break down the mechanics of that. The Spirit, with the capital S, referring to the divine spirit, is witnessing with our spirit, lowercase s, referring to the human spirit.
Two entities forming one united testimony.
In legal terms, if you want a document to hold up in court, you often need two signatures. You need the principal, and you need the notary or the witness.
That's a great comparison.
The text is saying you aren't just standing around hoping you're a new creation. There is an internal dual witnessing mechanism constantly authenticating your new identity.
And what powers this new creation? What activates this dual witnessing mechanism? According to the text, it is faith.
But here we run into a major collision with modern psychology, because we have to look closely at how the text defines where faith actually comes from.
This is where I think a lot of people, even religious people, get really tripped up.
Oh, absolutely. If you ask a random person on the street what faith is, they'll describe it as a form of willpower. It's the power of positive thinking. Like if you just squeeze your eyes shut tight enough and force yourself to believe something despite your doubts, congratulations, you have faith.
It's basically the modern believe-in-yourself movement grafted onto theology, a completely self-generated psychological state.
But the text completely annihilates that idea. It says faith is generated by hearing the word. It's an imparted element, meaning it is given to you from the outside.
It's not something you scrape together from the bottom of your own psychological barrel.
Right.
The text references Hebrews 12, which calls Jesus the author and perfecter of our faith. The logic is inescapable. If someone else is the author of your faith, you cannot be the author of it.
It takes the pressure off, in a way.
The author explains that when a person hears Christ, appreciates him, and treasures him, he causes faith to be generated in that person. He essentially becomes the faith within them.
Tying directly to Romans 10, so faith comes out of hearing, and hearing through the word of Christ, which connects right back to the disciple eating the word.
Exactly. The word you eat literally transforms into the faith you need. You aren't squeezing your eyes shut, you're consuming the raw materials that generate the faith.
It operates as a closed-loop system in this theology. God provides the word, the person hears and appreciates it, that hearing imparts the Spirit, and that Spirit operates as faith within the person.
But here is where things get really mechanically interesting, because it introduces mechanics to this faith. It isn't just a binary state where you either have a full tank of faith or you are completely empty.
There are levels.
Yes, the text brings up Romans 12.
Romans 12.3 states, not to think more highly of himself than he ought to think, but to think so as to be sober-minded, as God has apportioned to each a measure of faith.
A measure of faith.
The text argues that God gives believers the same faith in quality, but not in quantity. The quantity depends on how you grow, and it explicitly says that how much faith God apportioned to you depends on your attitude.
Yes, the strict requirement of being sober-minded.
I was actually thinking about how to explain this dynamic, and the best analogy I could come up with is a spiritual credit score.
A credit score. Let's unpack the parallels there.
Okay, think about a credit card. When you open your first account, the bank doesn't just give you unlimited funds. They apportion you a measure of credit, a starting limit of, say, $500. Now, if you are responsible, if you are sober-minded about your financial reality, you don't overspend and you pay it back, the bank looks at your attitude and says, we can trust this person with more capacity. They increase your limit to $5,000, then $10,000.
Because you have demonstrated a proper, realistic estimation of your resources and limitations?
Exactly. But if you are arrogant, if you think more highly of your financial situation than you ought, and you max out the card on luxury items you cannot afford, the bank doesn't just stop increasing your limit.
They might actively decrease
They
it.
might freeze the account entirely to protect you from your own hubris.
That maps perfectly onto the text exegesis of Romans 12 and Galatians 6. The author explicitly states, if we are not sober-minded, thinking that we are something when we are nothing, God would not increase his apportioning of faith to us, and he probably would even decrease it.
Arrogance actively lowers your borrowing limit for faith. Humility increases it. The text uses the Apostle Paul as the ultimate example of a high spiritual credit score.
It says if we grow today as Paul grew, the portion of faith we receive will be greatly enlarged. Why?
Yeah.
Because Paul considered others more excellent than himself, as he wrote in Philippians 2.
He had maximum capacity for faith because of his profound humility.
It is a sober thought, no pun intended, that your internal ego directly throttles your spiritual capacity.
It totally shifts the blame. If I feel like I'm struggling with my faith, my first instinct is to look up and say, God isn't giving me enough evidence or enough strength.
But this text demands introspection and says, no, check your attitude. Are you puffed up? Are you thinking you are something when you are nothing? Your arrogance is blocking the deposit.
Wow. Okay, so this faith we're discussing, this imparted, dynamically measured element, it doesn't just sit in a vacuum, right?
No, it isn't a static battery locked inside the believer's chest.
Uh,
According to the text, this faith expresses itself outwardly through a highly specific set of relationships. And the outline categorizes these relationships into 7 distinct metaphors.
This section of the text is incredibly dense. It just fire hoses metaphors at us.
Mhm.
And I have to admit, my initial reaction was a bit of literary whiplash.
It's an expansive list.
The metaphors jump from biology to sociology to cosmic responsibility.
Let's walk through them, starting with the first 2, which I would categorize as the organic metaphors.
Okay, number 1, Christ is the vine and believers are the branches, referencing John 15. And number 2, Christ is the head and believers are the members of his body, referencing 1 Corinthians 12.
These are very rooted in biology, a plant and a human anatomy. And what is the fundamental characteristic shared by a branch and a body part? Absolute, unavoidable dependency.
The text quotes John 15, "As the branch cannot bear fruit of itself unless it abides in the vine, so neither can you unless you abide in me. Apart from me, you can do nothing."
It's a stark picture of reliance. You literally cannot be a disconnected branch. A branch sitting on the ground isn't a free, independent branch. It's just dead wood waiting to rot.
Same with a body part. A severed finger doesn't have autonomy, it has expiration. These first two metaphors establish that being a believer means you have zero independent spiritual existence. You are either plugged into the main organism or you are dead.
Which naturally flows into the third metaphor, focusing on sustenance.
Number 3, Christ is the breath of life, the water of life, and the bread of life. And believers are his breathers, eaters, and drinkers.
This connects directly back to your digestion analogy from the disciple identity.
Yes, but it expands it from just reading the word to a comprehensive ecosystem of survival. The text pulls heavily from the Gospel of John here. "I am the bread of life. The water that I will give him will become in him a spring of water."
In John 20, where Jesus actually breathes on the disciples, it emphasizes the visceral, daily, momentary intake. You don't just eat one meal on Sunday and expect to survive the week.
You breathe constantly. It frames the relationship not as a philosophical agreement, but as oxygen.
But then, the text shifts gears entirely with the fourth metaphor, the intimate metaphor.
Number 4, Christ is the bridegroom and believers are his bride.
This is a massive shift from biology to sociology, from a vine clinging to a trellis to a wedding ceremony.
The text references Revelation 19, the marriage of the Lamb, where the wife has made herself ready, and Ephesians 5, where Christ sanctifies the church, cleansing her to present her to himself glorious.
What do you think is the psychological function of jumping from bread to a bride?
Well, the focus shifts to purity, emotion, choice, and collective readiness. A branch doesn't possess simplicity and purity, it's just a plant operating on instinct. A bride implies affection, devotion, mutual choice, and exclusivity.
It adds a layer of romantic and emotional fidelity that a plant metaphor lacks entirely. Okay, moving to the fifth metaphor, the paternal and rescue metaphor.
Number 5, Christ is the father of the orphans, and believers are the orphans who have become his children.
The source text leans incredibly heavily on Psalm 107 for this one. In fact, it provides 43 verses of Psalm 107 to illustrate this single point.
I read through that block of text, and Psalm 107 is basically a masterclass in human desperation and cosmic rescue. It outlines 4 distinct scenarios of people completely out of options.
Let's analyze why the author chose these 4 specific scenarios. The first group described as wandering. Verses 4 and 5. They wandered in the wilderness, on the desert way. They found no city of habitation. Hungry and thirsty, their soul fainted within them.
That is the existential dread of being lost and lacking basic resources. And the rescue is in verse 7. He led them on a straight way that they might come to a city of habitation. The orphan who is wandering gets a home and a direction.
The second group is imprisoned, verses 10 and 14. Some inhabited darkness and the shadow of death, and were bound in affliction and irons. He brought them out of darkness, and he broke apart their bonds.
This group isn't lost. They know exactly where they are, but they are trapped by their own choices or circumstances. And the orphan who is trapped gets freedom.
The third group is violently ill. Verse 18, their soul loathed all food, and they drew near to the gates of death. And the rescue, in verse 20, he sent forth his word and healed them.
And the final group is caught in a cosmic storm at sea, entirely at the mercy of chaotic forces. Verses 26 and 29. They mounted up to the heavens, they went down to the depths, he made the storm be still.
The orphan in chaos gets peace. The author uses this massive psalm to show that being a believer isn't just about enjoying a wedding feast. It is about acknowledging the grim reality that without the Father, you are a wandering, imprisoned, sick, drowning orphan.
It's a very stark picture of baseline human vulnerability, which segues perfectly into the 6th metaphor, the medical metaphor.
Yes, number 6.
Christ is our physician, and we are his patients, enjoying him as our healer to be our forgiveness, enjoyment, joy, satisfaction, and freedom.
To illustrate this, the text provides the narrative from Mark 2 regarding the healing of the paralytic.
This is the famous story where 4 men carry their paralyzed friend to see Jesus, but the house is so packed with people that they cannot get in the door. So they climb up, physically dig through the mud and tile roof, and lower him down on a mat right in front of Jesus.
Now, look closely at how Jesus responds in verse 5. He doesn't immediately heal the man's physical legs, which is what everyone expects. Instead, he says, "Child, your sins are forgiven."
Which instantly enrages the religious scribes sitting in the room. They start thinking, who can forgive sins except one? God. This is blasphemy.
And Jesus replies in verse 9, which is easier to say to the paralytic, your sins are forgiven, or to say, rise and take up your mat and walk. And then he heals the man's legs to prove he has the authority to forgive the sins.
It's a great story, but why does our source text use this specific narrative to define the believer's relationship to Christ?
Because it demonstrates that this theology treats spiritual failure sin as an illness requiring a healer, not merely a crime requiring a judge.
Oh, wow, that is a massive psychological distinction.
If you stand before a judge as a criminal, the judge might exhibit mercy and forgive your crime, but the relationship remains purely legal, distant, and adversarial. The judge's job is over once the gavel falls.
But if you stand before a physician as a patient,
The physician is actively, intimately working to cure the underlying disease that caused the symptoms. The text explicitly quotes Jesus saying, "Those who are strong have no need of a physician, but those who are ill. I did not come to call the righteous, but sinners."
so the believer is a patient in long-term recovery. The sin is the paralysis. The forgiveness is the ongoing healing process. That reframes the entire concept of religious guilt. Under this framework, you aren't a bad person terrified of punishment. You're a sick person in desperate need of medicine.
Exactly. It removes the punitive dread and replaces it with therapeutic dependency. And finally, we reach the seventh metaphor, the cosmic metaphor.
Number 7. Christ is the light of the world, and believers are his followers, so that they may have the light of life and be his diffuser to spread the divine light.
Notice the word diffuser. We have moved entirely from the internal eating, breathing, being healed, to the ultimate outward expression.
It references Matthew 5. You are the light of the world. A city situated upon a mountain cannot be hidden. And Philippians 2, which talks about shining as luminaries in the world.
The believer's ultimate function, after passing through all these previous stages of dependency, intimacy, and healing, is to take that internal sustenance and project it outward into the darkness of the world.
Okay, hold on. I'm getting a bit of spiritual whiplash here.
Yeah, it's a lot.
A second ago, I was a branch on a vine, then I was a bride, then an orphan, a patient in a hospital, and now I'm a lamp diffuser. If the goal of this text is to build a clear, comprehensible identity, isn't this avalanche of mixed metaphors just confusing?
I see what you mean.
Like, if I try to write a character who acts like a plant, a bride, and a patient all at the same time, the audience is going to reject it as incoherent.
From a purely literary standpoint, mixing metaphors is usually frowned upon. But you have to understand the theological intent behind it. The text uses this kaleidoscopic approach precisely because no single human concept can capture what it calls the bountifully supplying contents of this theology.
Bountifully supplying contents. That is a dense phrase. What does that actually mean?
It means the divine resources available to the believer are so rich, varied, and uncontainable that human language breaks down trying to describe them. Think about it. If the author only used the bride metaphor, you might conclude the relationship is purely emotional and romantic, completely missing the absolute cellular biological dependency illustrated by the vine.
Right, a bride can divorce a groom and still live. A branch cannot divorce a vine and survive.
Exactly. And if the author only used the physician metaphor, you would fixate entirely on your own sickness and frailty, missing the glorious outward cosmic destiny of being the light of the world.
So the author stacks these metaphors intentionally to create a composite image. It's a 360-degree 3D model of the believer.
Precisely. It's a spiritual Swiss Army knife. Now, if you take the active, digesting learning of the disciple and you combine it with the deep, multifaceted, seven-layered connection of the believer, it results in a profound change of status.
Which brings us to the third identity in our deep dive, the saint.
Now, just like disciple and believer, we have to completely dismantle and rebuild the definition of saint based on this text.
Because in common culture, a saint is the unattainable paragon of virtue. It's the morally flawless historical figure with a glowing halo in a stained glass window. The person who never got angry in traffic, never had a selfish thought, and spent their entire life feeding the poor.
Right. If you call someone a saint today, you just mean they are incredibly nice and infinitely patient.
But the text rejects that moralistic definition entirely, doesn't it?
Yes, it defines a saint fundamentally differently, simply as someone who is separated and made holy unto God.
And to ground this definition of separation, the text reaches way back into the Old Testament. It references the ancient Nazirite vow in number 6.
The Nazirite vow is a fascinating historical and theological precedent. Let's look at the specific rules outlined in number 6 for someone voluntarily separating themselves to God.
I actually read through those ancient regulations. They are highly specific. The person taking the vow had to separate from wine and grapes. They were forbidden from plaiting their hair, and they could not go near a dead body, even if it was their own mother or father.
It was a visible, physical, and radical separation from the normative culture of the day. But we have to ask why those 3 specific things. What did they symbolize?
Right, because skipping a glass of wine doesn't magically make you holy.
Exactly. The text interprets these ancient rules symbolically. Separating from wine represents cutting off from earthly, natural stimulation and worldly pleasures. Refusing to cut their hair represented rejection of natural human glory and societal vanity, submitting instead to divine authority.
And avoiding the dead body.
That represented a complete separation from the natural affections that lead to the corruption of death.
So the text uses this ancient vow as the baseline for what a saint is today. It isn't about being perfectly polite or morally flawless. It's about being intentionally separated and set apart for a specific divine use.
But here's the crux of this entire section on the saint. The text makes a crucial two-pronged distinction about how this sanctification, this making holy, actually happens. It divides the process into positional sanctification and dispositional sanctification.
Positional versus dispositional. This is where the theology gets incredibly granular, but it's vital to understanding the framework. Let's break these down.
Well, positional sanctification, according to the text, is an objective change of status achieved through the redeeming blood of Christ. It references Hebrews 13. Jesus, that he might sanctify the people through his own blood, suffered outside the gate.
So that is a status change. It happens to you instantly.
Yes. It is immediate and objective. But dispositional sanctification is achieved through the impartation of the holy nature. The text references 1 Thessalonians 5, "And the God of peace himself sanctify you wholly, and may your spirit and soul and body be preserved complete."
This is the subjective, ongoing, often painful transformation of your actual internal character.
Exactly.
Okay, I was racking my brain trying to figure out how to explain this dense theological concept simply, and I came up with an analogy. The university acceptance analogy.
Oh, let's see how that holds up.
Imagine you apply to an elite university, like Harvard. One day, you get a letter in the mail. It says, "Congratulations, you are accepted." In that exact, miraculous instant, your status changes. You are now officially a Harvard student. You have been separated from the general public and brought into the institution by the authority of the admissions board. You get the ID card and the email address. That is positional sanctification.
But having the ID card does not mean you actually possess the knowledge of the institution yet.
Exactly. You are a Harvard student positionally, but you might still be terrible at calculus. You haven't read the books. So you have to actually go to class. You have to study, struggle, fail exams, write papers, and let the professors completely change how you think over the next 4 years. That slow, grueling, transformative process of genuinely becoming an educated person, that is dispositional sanctification.
That is an excellent way to conceptualize it. The text insists that both are absolutely necessary. You need the instant positional change, the redeeming blood that buys you the acceptance letter and grants you access to the campus.
But if you stop there, you're just a freshman with an ID card who never attends a lecture.
You must undergo the lifelong dispositional transformation of your actual nature by the Spirit in order to graduate.
So a saint, in this framework, isn't someone who is already perfect in a stained glass window. A saint is someone who has been positionally accepted and is currently grinding through the dispositional coursework of becoming holy. A saint is in the trenches of transformation.
Precisely. And if you follow this trajectory, from the learner digesting the word, to the connected believer living out the 7 metaphors, to the set-apart saint undergoing positional and dispositional change, all of these prior identities ultimately funnel into the final, most consequential title in this entire document.
The fourth and final identity, the Christian.
A word that has meant 1,000 different things to 1,000 different cultures, political parties, and empires over 2 millennia. But we have to look strictly at how this specific text defines it.
How does it define it? Because usually Christian is just a demographic checkbox on a census form.
The text defines a Christian as a Christ man. It is someone who is in an organic union, living Christ for his magnification. It references Acts 11, noting that it was in Antioch that the disciples were first called Christians.
It's the culmination of the journey. The text cites Philippians 1, where the Apostle Paul says, "Christ will be magnified in my body, whether through life or through death, for to me to live is Christ."
It's the ultimate expression of the organic reproduction we discussed way back in the beginning with the disciple. You have eaten the word, generated the faith, undergone the dispositional sanctification, and now you are Christ-man. You are magnifying that divine nature to the world.
And the text notes that this is the destiny ordained in this specific economy. Let's pause and define that word economy because that threw me off when I first read it. Usually when we hear economy, we think of inflation, interest rates, and the stock market. What does it mean in this theological context?
It's a translation of the Greek word oikonia, which literally means household law or household administration.
Hmm.
In this text, it refers to God's master plan, his administrative arrangement to dispense himself into humanity to produce this corporate expression.
It's the grand strategy of the universe, not a financial policy.
Yes. But as we reach the end of this grand strategy, the text throws a massive curveball. After pages and pages of talking about corporate expression, about being branches in a single vine, members of a single body, and achieving unity, the final point of the source text is intensely, almost shockingly individualistic.
You are referring to the concept of the individual race course.
Yes. The text declares, every Christian on this earth has a special journey that the Lord has assigned to him as a functioning member of Christ. He has to take the journey himself. No one else can replace him, nor can he replace anyone else.
It cites Acts 20, where Paul talks about finishing my course, and 1 Corinthians 9 about running on a race course to lay hold of the prize, and 2 Timothy 4, where Paul declares at the end of his life, I have finished the course.
This presents a massive paradox.
It really does. After spending the entire text arguing that we have to abandon our independence to become a corporate God-man, why does the text end by isolating the individual? Saying no one else can replace you sounds like a contradiction of the whole we are all one body idea. Doesn't this undermine the unity the text just spent thousands of words building?
It seems like a contradiction, but it's actually a brilliant paradox. To resolve it, we have to look closely at the final block of scripture the text provides, 1 Corinthians 12.
The famous passage about the foot, the hand, and the eye.
Exactly. The text quotes verse 15. If the foot should say, because I am not a hand, I am not of the body, it is not that because of this it is not of the body. And verse 17, if the whole body were an eye, where would the hearing be?
Okay, let's play this out. If every member of the body tried to run the exact same race course, if everyone tried to be the eye, what happens?
The corporate expression becomes a monstrosity. A giant eye rolling around on the floor is not a body. It is a nightmare. It cannot walk. It cannot grasp. It cannot hear. The corporate expression that this theology aims for is fundamentally impossible without the highly specific, completely uncopyable function of the individual part.
True unity in this framework isn't conformity. It isn't everyone acting exactly the same, having the exact same personality, or running the exact same journey. True unity is diverse members running their exact, unique individual lanes to finish their personal course, but doing so attached to the same head.
No one else can replace him, nor can he replace anyone else. The foot cannot run the eye's race course. It would fail miserably, and if the foot gets jealous of the eye and decides to stop functioning, the entire body is crippled.
The foot must be the best foot it can be through all the steps we outlined today: discipleship, believing, sanctification, so that the whole body can move forward. The ultimate goal is corporate, but the execution is profoundly, irreplaceably individual.
What an incredible framework to unpack. It is a staggering piece of architectural theology.
It really is. Let's synthesize this massive journey we just took in this deep dive.
We started with the disciple, the active learner who isn't just mimicking behavior, but is literally digesting the word to build new spiritual cells, tearing down old psychological scaffolding, and aiming to be Jesusly human, sweet, charming, and attractive, powered by an internal source of rest rather than natural struggle.
Then we move to the believer, the organically connected entity holding the second birth certificate, whose faith is not generated by willpower, but by hearing the word, and whose capacity for that faith is strictly regulated by their humility, their spiritual credit score. A believer connected to the divine through 7 multifaceted metaphors of dependency, intimacy, rescue, and healing.
From there, we examine the saint, the one who has received the positional acceptance letter through the redeeming blood and is now doing the hard dispositional coursework of letting their actual nature be transformed, voluntarily separating from the intoxicating and corrupting elements of the natural world.
Culminating in the Christian, the Christ man, the individual who has been so reconstituted that they are now running an irreplaceable, completely unique race course for the ultimate benefit of the corporate body and the divine economy. It is a completely different way of looking at identity. It isn't a static label you wear. It's an organic consuming process you undergo.
It demands total participation.
Which leaves me with a final thought for you, the listener, as you go about your day. At the very beginning of this deep dive, we talked about how comforting static labels are. But this text argues that our very nature, our internal disposition, is fundamentally and constantly being altered by what we intellectually and spiritually consume.
The inescapable reality of the digestion metaphor.
Yes. If this framework is right, if we truly become what we consume on a cellular level to the point of generating a whole new identity inside ourselves, then take a hard look at your diet today. Think about the everyday words, the media, the social feeds, the arguments, and the concepts you are currently digesting hour by hour. Based on your current diet, what kind of nature are you building inside yourself right now?
That is the ultimate question for any journey of transformation.
Something to mull over as you run your unique race course today. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.